Hey everyone, in the last video we talked about print statements and comments, and in today's video we're going to talk about variables and data types. So let's start with some definitions. A variable is just a name that stores a value, and you can think of this like a labeled box. The label is the variable, and the value is what's inside of the box. So let's write one out really quick. And anytime you're creating a variable, it's going to follow the same format. You're going to pick a name. We'll pick X. You're going to use the assignment operator, otherwise known as the equal sign, and then you're going to type the data that you want to store. Let's say we want to store the number 10. And there you have it. Your variable X is now referring to the number 10. And this can be very useful if you have a really large number, like whatever this is, and you know that you're going to have to use it multiple times in your program. Instead of typing out this number over and over again, which is very error-prone and takes a really long time, you can simply assign it once to the name or the variable X, and then anytime you want to refer to that number, you can just call the variable X. But for our purposes, we're just going to leave this at 10. Now, there is a few things to notice here. X is the variable name, and you can name it practically anything you want, but there are some requirements. The first being that it can be the letters A through Z, uppercase, lowercase. So I could have capital X equals 20. And what you should notice here is that variables are case sensitive. So lowercase x and capital X are two different things, which means if I call lowercase x in my program, it's going to refer to the number 10. But if I call capital X, it's going to refer to the number 20. Now, you can also have numbers in your variable names, but it cannot start with a number. So I could say x30 equals 30. That works. But I can't say 30x equals 30. That's going to throw an error. Now, let's say we want to be a little bit more specific with our variables. We want to store something like, I don't know, someone's first name. But this is throwing an error. And the reason for this is because there's a space. Spaces are not allowed in variable names. But don't worry, there's two simple solutions for when you want to have a multi-word variable name. The first we refer to as camel case. And all that means is that you capitalize the first letter of the second word and then just go on with your day. This works. The second solution is snake case. And so all you do is put an underscore between the first and the second word. Now, you can use either of these, whichever is easier for you, but it is common practice to stick to the same format throughout your entire program, so if you choose to use camel case, make sure that you use it throughout your entire program. Same goes with snake case. Another quick note is that special characters are not allowed either. So if I said x at equals 10, you can see that creates an error. Another example, if I wanted to do the $sign. So no special characters allowed. And the last thing, which I feel I should mention, but is a bit beyond the scope of this video, is reserved words. So in Python, there are some words that are reserved for specific functionalities. Now, you may or may not have heard of a conditional statement. If you haven't, that's okay. We'll go over it in a future video. But the way you start these is by typing if. Now, if I wanted to create a variable named if, you can see that, first of all, it's purple, not blue, and that it also creates an error. That's because if is a reserved word in Python, and it cannot be used as a variable name. And this goes for all reserved keywords. So that's pretty much all of the naming requirements. But the last thing that I want to touch on about variables is that you can reassign them. once you assign a variable, it's not stuck like that. You have the choice to change its value. And how you do that is by choosing the same name, taking the same name, and setting it equal to something else. But which one is Python going to refer to? The important thing to know about Python is that it reads everything from top to bottom. So on this line, x is going to refer to 10. But on this line, and everything below it, x is going to refer to 20, because it is the most recent change to the value. And an easy way to display this is with print statements. So really quick, before I show that, I'm going to go over how to print out a variable. So like in the last video, you do print, and then in parentheses, you put what you want to print. Now, in the last video, we didn't have variables, so we were just printing out strings, like this. But if you have a variable, even if it is a string variable, you don't need quotes. You just need the name of the variable, and Python's going to know what to do with that. So you can see if I click run, print out x prints out 20. But let's say I put print x up here. What do we think this is going to print out? If you said 10 and then 20, you'd be correct. And that's because, like I said, Python reads everything from top to bottom. Anything beneath this line, not applicable, but everything above the line is. Okay, moving on to data types. So this right here is an example of an integer. Let's type that out using our comments. Integer. And all that means is that it's a whole number. And these can be positive, or they can be negative, as long as it's a whole number. The nice thing about Python is that you don't actually have to define your data types. You don't have to choose what data type a variable is going to refer to, because Python is going to automatically recognize that this is a whole number and it's going to cast it as an integer. But in other coding languages, you do have to say like int x equals 10. You don't do that in Python, but you do this in like C++. So it's good to know what the data types refer to. But let's say you want a decimal. Well, that's simple too. All you do, create your variable name, use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, and then type out your decimal. Let's call that pi. And we call this a float. Or in some cases, it could be referred to as a double. So anytime you're using a decimal, that's a float. Like I said, for Python, you don't really need to know any of this, but it is useful information for other coding languages. And you don't have to do anything yourself. You just write your variable as is. Same thing goes with this. Let's say we want to put negative pi. You can make it a negative. Now, moving on, we also talked about this a little bit in our last video and a little bit in this video. Strings. So strings are really useful if you want to store a word. So you'd have name, and then the important thing about strings is that it has to be in quotes. So anytime you're writing a string, put it in quotes. Now, you could also have a string be a number. But the key difference between an integer or a float and a string is that it's in quotes. And Python is going to treat these two differently. So you can't really perform mathematical operations on a string, but you can on an integer and a float. And that's why it's important that you use these different variable types. But if you have no need for any of that, I suppose you could make it a string. Now, the last data type that we're going to cover is called a Boolean variable. Here, let me add this string. Okay, so a Boolean variable. Now, Boolean variables can be set equal to either true or false. And I want you to notice something really quick. The T in true has to be capitalized, and so does the F in false. Otherwise, it's not going to recognize that. And we won't really use these that much right now, but once again, when we touch on conditional statements, they're going to become pretty useful. So this is a Boolean. So I'm just going to quickly reiterate how to print out variables. So with the integer, you could just say print A, or you don't even have to store it as a variable if you want to print it out. If you know that you want to print out an integer, you can also just write that integer. And it doesn't have to be in quotes. So there we have it. It's first going to print out A, which corresponds to -10, and then it's just going to print out 10. And the same goes for floats. Now, for strings, I did mention before that all strings had to go in quotes, but if you have a variable of a string, you don't have to put that in quotes. You can just refer to the variable like before, and you'll see that if you do print it in quotes, Python isn't going to know that you're referring to that variable name. So you can see the first one, which isn't in quotes, is referring to the variable name, which should print out Abby. And that's what it does. The second one is in quotes, and it's treating that as a string itself. So it's just going to print out name. And then lastly, Boolean variables. These all follow a very similar pattern. It's the same thing, just print and then the variable name. And you'll see if we run that, it prints out true and then false. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our video, and here's the challenge that I have for you guys. Write a program that stores your name, age, and a Boolean value, and then print them out. Pretty simple, but sometimes data types and variables can get kind of confusing, so if you need a little bit extra practice, don't be ashamed. Thanks for watching, guys.